Hello! In 1981, Kent Stoll, the director for the Pacific Northwest Ballet Company, approached famed children's illustrator Maurice Sendak, you may know him best for Where the Wild Things Are, to design a new production of The Nutcracker. Sendak was initially hesitant. Oh, that Christmas ballet where nothing happens in the second half? However, when Sendak started digging into the original fairy tale novella that the ballet is adapted from, ETA Hoffmann's Nutcracker und Mouseking, The Nutcracker and the Mouseking, published in 1816, Sendak realized that the original work had a lot of grit and thematic integrity that had been shaved off over the previous 2 centuries. Although the Nutcracker ballet is a modern masterpiece, buoyed by a revival in interest in the 1950s, its original performances in the 1890s were kind of a flop. Even though Tchaikovsky's music is impeccable, honestly some of the best orchestral music ever written, the libretto and choreography were seen as severely lacking. The story as a dumbed down and simplified French version of the Nutcracker, written by Alexandre Dumas, who you may best know for The Count of Monte Cristo or The Three Musketeers. While Dumas' version of the Nutcracker is absolutely gorgeous in its prose and its storytelling, that too, in turn, was a dumbed down and simplified version of the original ETA Hoffmann tale. Thanks to these multiple levels of transmission over the last 2 centuries, the Nutcrackers that people get exposed to today are some level of censored or Disneyfied. That's not even getting to the many truly terrible modern adaptations we get. The Nuttiest Nutcracker, the Nutcracker in 3D, the Nutcracker in the Four Realms. Not Barbie and the Nutcracker though. That one is a stone cold masterpiece. But what I'm getting at is that Maurice Sendak found that he had a lot to work with. While sticking to the bones of the Tchaikovsky ballet, he could use clever production design to bring in lots of elements from the ETA Hoffmann tale that were otherwise ignored. The ensuing Pacific Northwest ballet adaptation was very successful, which in turn led to a filmed adaptation as well as an illustrated version of the ETA Hoffmann tale by Maurice Sendak, using a lot of his production design notes as well as new and original illustrations. When you compare the Tchaikovsky ballet to the original ETA Hoffmann short story, you'll notice that the biggest difference is that the ballet cuts the whole middle third out. It cuts out an extended sequence, a fairy tale within a fairy tale called The Tale of the Hard Nut, which offers a truly disturbing backstory for the Nutcracker that we know in the tale. So come with me as we flash forward 20 years. It is now the early 2000s. My media diet is mostly various forms of educational VHS tape that are checked out from my local lending library. Since my parents prioritized things that would have been to my sister's taste, one of these tapes that we ended up watching was Notes Alive presents Nutcracker, The Untold Story. Notes Alive, as it turns out, was a set of educational VHS tapes that took various children's stories and used rudimentary CGI, like truly janky late 90s CGI, to bring them to life in combination with a narrator and a full orchestra. So this educational VHS tape adapted all the grotesque, disturbing parts of the Maurice Sendak Nutcracker that the mainstream ballet did not, using grotesque, disturbing animation. As a result, the Nutcracker has become a core childhood trauma for me. Not the first time that Maurice Sendak has done that, wittingly or unwittingly. Who here remembers In the Night Kitchen? Milk in the batter! Milk in the batter! Because of this VHS tape, the Nutcracker, as told by ETA Hoffmann, but presented by Maurice Sendak, has become a core part of my psychology. And by making this video about the Nutcracker, I hope to exorcise a little bit of that trauma. Just in time for Christmas! It's a true Chrimbus mackerel. Before I talk about the story itself, I'd like to briefly touch on Ernst Theodor Wilhelm Hoffmann, which you'll notice does not translate to ETA. Later in his life, he took the affectation of replacing the Wilhelm with Amadeus in tribute to Mozart, hoping to bring a shred of Mozart's creative brilliance onto himself. It's very German romantic in that way. ETA Hoffmann is perhaps one of Germany's most treasured purveyors of original fairy tales. He was a contemporary of the brothers Grimm. The Nutcracker and the Mouseking only gets published 4 years after the first edition of Grimm's fairy tales, for reference. However, when you actually look at his works, you'll find that he is far less of a Hans Christian Andersen and far more of a Clark Ashton Smith. While some of Hoffmann's tales were for kids, the vast majority were for adults, and I feel pretty comfortable calling it a predecessor to weird fiction. His stories, or at least the ones I've read so far, freely blended Gothic literature with fantasy, mystery, thriller, science fiction, touching on all of these modern genres before these genres had names. But what held them all together is that for the most part they were all very, very dark. I actually see Hoffmann most compared to Edgar Allan Poe in terms of the macabre element that he brings to all of his fiction. I won't go too hard into ETA Hoffmann's life because frankly I think he has such an interesting and varied bibliography that he will be worth coming to again and again and again over the years. So I will say this, reading Hoffmann's biography really makes you appreciate how unstable life was for the average Central or Western European during the early 19th century. Every time Hoffmann settles down to a new government position or a new place where he can maybe get some composing or writing done, Napoleon invades and he has to flee somewhere else. This led to long periods of his life where he was separated from his wife and his infant daughter because it was simply too dangerous for them to be anywhere near the front. In 1804, when he was starving on the streets of Berlin, desperate to find work, he received word from Poland that his infant daughter, Cecilia, had died. The next year, Napoleon absolutely destroys the Third Coalition at the Battle of Austerlitz, which led to Holy Roman Emperor Francis II resigning, leading to the permanent dissolution of the Holy Roman Empire, 1,005 years after Pope Leo III first crowned Charlemagne. Now Germany was nothing more than a loose confederation of squabbling duchies and kingdoms and principalities and free cities and what have you, all held together in loose confederation. My point is that even though Hoffmann had found some level of stability by the time he wrote the Nutcracker, this sense of desperation and potential loss infests all of his work. You never know in your world, whether that be your career, your family, or even your empire, is going to be seized away from you. It was with that lens that I first read the Nutcracker. Welcome back to our Christmas Eve festivities. Honestly, the lighting at night isn't too bad. Maybe I should do this more often. The ETA Hoffmann Nutcracker is easily divisible into 4 chunks, of which the Tchaikovsky Ballet adapts 2, the first quarter and the final quarter. If you're familiar with the Nutcracker story at all, the setup won't be too surprising to you. Marie and Fritz are 2 upper middle class children in the city of Nuremberg in the early 19th century. Notice how I said Marie and not Clara. In the original story, Marie is the younger sibling. She is only 7 years old while Fritz is a couple years older than her. In the Tchaikovsky Ballet, the character was aged up a few years to a pre-adolescent and given a new name, Clara. I can understand why they did this. Throughout its long lifespan, many people have adapted the Nutcracker as a romance, the titular Nutcracker as the dashing hero. By having the heroine as a 12 or 13-year-old girl, they can explore these first blossomings of adolescent romance, right? Let's just say it's very difficult to choreograph a sensual ballet duet if one of the dancers is a literal 7-year-old. And so in various adaptations of the Nutcracker, people will usually use the name Marie to refer to the original 7-year-old version of the heroine versus Clara to refer to the aged up 13-year-old version. As I was saying, Marie and Fritz are two children of the upper middle class Stahlbaum family. Immediately on the first page, we are introduced to the engine of this story, Godfather Drosselmeyer. Much has been made of Drosselmeyer throughout the Nutcracker's many adaptations. He is usually portrayed as this grand source of wisdom and caring. If it tells you anything, one of the recent adaptations cast Morgan Freeman as Drosselmeyer. However, in his original incarnation, Drosselmeyer is a much weirder character. In terms of description, his voice, his actions, he is much more similar to Mr. Boss from Smiling Friends. He is described as this short, eccentric, balding man who is prickly and easily offended. Multiple times throughout the Nutcracker, Marie will casually describe her beloved godfather as being ugly, and you can tell every single time that he is deeply hurt by that. This man, who is a Supreme Court Justice of the city of Nuremberg, also has a secondary career as a craftsman, making toys and automata for the various privileged children of Nuremberg. Fritz is very warlike. He is obsessed with guns and tactics and battles, while Marie consistently demonstrates sincere care for her various dolls that she has collected over the years. When Drosselmeyer presents them with a castle filled with hundreds of automaton figures, all moving back and forth like clockwork, the children are pretty underwhelmed. They can look into the castle and they can see these little figures back and forth, but you can't really play with that, can you? And so Drosselmeyer gets pretty offended. He was like, do you know how much work I put into this? I should go home. But their mom is able to talk him down. Marie finds a toy that she falls in love with instantly, the titular Nutcracker. At the time the story was written, the idea of having a Nutcracker doll was a relatively new phenomenon. The visual iconography of the Nutcracker that we know today doesn't really exist until the 1870s, when they finally start getting mass produced. Marie falls in love with this Nutcracker doll so sincerely that her brother seizes it away and tries to use it to crack a nut that's simply too big, breaking it and causing a lot of its wooden teeth to drop out on the floor. Marie bandages up the doll and attends to it as if she were a nurse watching over a wounded soldier. The party winds down, Drosselmeyer goes home, and Marie's parents go to bed. Marie remains awake a little longer because she has to go through the motions of introducing the Nutcracker to her other dolls, including the head doll named Clara, which is where we get the alternate name for grown-up Marie. However, the clock strikes midnight and we enter the witching hour. Marie transitions from the realm of reality to the realm of fantasy, or perhaps imagination. She encounters, to her horror, an army of mice, thousands of them led by a seven-headed Mouseking. Who should come to her rescue but the very Nutcracker that she has been caring for and protecting? This Nutcracker, suddenly animated, leads all of Marie's dolls as well as Fritz's toy soldiers in an all-out assault against the mice. Here's a nice Maurice Sendak double spread of the calamity. The battle goes back and forth as battles tend to do. Soon the Nutcracker himself is in trouble. Hemmed in on all sides, Nutcracker was in dire peril. He tried to jump over the ledge of the toy cabinet, but his legs were too short. Clara and Trude were lying in a faint and could not help him. Hussars and dragoons leaped nimbly past him into the cabinet. In wild despair he shouted, a horse, my kingdom for a horse. At that moment, two enemy musketeers seized him by the wooden cloak and, squeaking triumphantly from his 7 throats, the king of the mice charged him. Marie was beside herself. Oh, my poor Nutcracker! My poor Nutcracker! She sobbed. Without quite knowing what she was doing, she took off her left shoe and flung it with all her might into the thick of the enemy, hoping to hit their king. At that moment, everything vanished from Marie's sight. She felt a sharp pain in her left arm and fell to the floor in a faint. This is the climax of Act 1 of the Tchaikovsky ballet. Marie, or Clara, throws her slipper, somehow mortally wounding the Mouseking, which allows the Nutcracker to defeat him once and for all. However, this isn't isn't the case in the original story. Here we enter the second part. Marie wakes up the next day, feverish and wounded. According to her parents and the doctor who is attending her, she had stayed up late playing make-believe with the toys in her cabinet. However, in that critical moment of play where she threw her slipper, she stumbled backwards into a cabinet, shattering it, with a giant shard of glass ripping her forearm open. So here she is, stuck in bed, recovering from nearly bleeding out all over her parents' floor. This is where we get into the crux of what makes Hoffmann's Nutcracker a fascinating story. It asks you again and again, is this all make-believe or is this real? Most adaptations of the Nutcracker present the fantasy to you as reality. Obviously, the Nutcracker comes to life. Obviously, there is a Mouseking. And of course, at the end, there is some sort of, oh, it was all a dream. Or was it? Wink, wink. Which is obviously very unsatisfying if you had just spent the last 90 minutes or whatever watching a sequence of fantastic events play out in their entirety right in front of you. If you see the fantasy represented, it's very hard for you as a viewer to doubt the reality of what you just invested in, what you just spent significant amounts of time watching. But in the Hoffmann story, he walks the fine line of keeping you perpetually unsure, perpetually ambivalent whether the fantastic sequence of the Nutcracker coming to life is genuinely something that is happening to Marie, or whether this is just an extended session of make-believe for her. However, while Marie's parents keep saying things like, oh, you're just being a silly little child, make away with all of these delusions, right? Drosselmeyer doubles down on everything that Marie is saying. He confirms either directly or indirectly everything that she says, which leads to this peculiar sequence. For you see, Drosselmeyer did appear the previous night as the clock struck 12. Was that part of Drosselmeyer's greater magic? Or was that just part of Marie's fantasy? The moment Marie saw Godfather Drosselmeyer in his short yellow coat, she seemed to see Nutcracker fighting his losing battle with the mice, and without thinking she cried out, "Oh, Godfather Drosselmeyer, how ugly you were! I saw you sitting on the clock, covering it with your wings to keep it from striking aloud, because that would have scared the mice away. I heard you calling to the king of the mice. Oh, why didn't you come to the Nutcracker's help, you nasty Godfather Drosselmeyer? It's all your fault that I hurt myself and have to lie here sick in bed." Marie's mother was horrified. "Dear child," she said, "what are you talking about?" But Godfather Drosselmeyer made strange faces and said in a rasping, monotonous voice, "Pendulum had to whir, softly purr, and couldn't strike. That's how pendulums are, but bells are ringing, ding dong, bing bong, bing bong. Doll girl, don't be frightened, bells are ringing loud and long. To chase the king of mice away, out comes flying black and gray. Pick, peck, peck, and peck. Bells are ringing, clocks are whirring, pendulums can't help whirring, snick and snack, whir and purr." Marie stared wide-eyed at Godfather Drosselmeyer because he looked entirely different and much uglier than usual, and was moving his right arm back and forth like a marionette. She would have been really afraid of him if her mother hadn't been there, and if Fritz, who had turned up in the meantime, hadn't interrupted him with loud laughter and cried out, "Goodness gracious, Godfather Drosselmeyer, you're really funny today. You make me think of the jumping jack that I threw behind the stove the other day." But the children's mother said very gravely, "Dear Judge Drosselmeyer, what a strange rigmarole. What is the meaning of it all?" "My word," said Drosselmeyer, laughing. "Didn't you know my pretty watchmaker song? I always sing it to little patients like Marie." For a long time, I took this as obvious proof that Marie wasn't delusional after all, that she really did meet up with the Nutcracker and fight the Mouseking. However, upon multiple rereads, I realized that everything he alludes to in that song, Marie had previously mentioned in that conversation. Did this happen or did this not happen? While Marie is sick in bed, recovering from her injury and her fever, Drosselmeyer decides to tell her the backstory of the Nutcracker itself. The tale of the hard nut, which I alluded to earlier. Unlike the specific time and place of 1816 Nuremberg, the tale of the hard nut takes place in a generic fairy tale kingdom, one that contrasts with the gritty, politically savvy reactionary monarchism that the 19th century would come to be known for. Something I've come to realize as I've been reading more and more fairy tales is how bizarre it is to have the standard milieu of these stories to be kings and queens, princes and princesses in a world where that still was the political norm. Right? Like, you don't have many fairy tales where a character goes and meets the President of the United States. Where you can feel that ancien regime of courtly manners and of absolute monarchy gasping its last breaths. The tale of the Hard Nut opens with the birth of Princess Pirlipat, a newborn member of a hoity-toity royal family who is described as beautiful but having a proclivity for biting people. Her parents are incompetent royals. Her father cares more for his pork sausage than he does the actual mechanics of running a kingdom. He forces his wife to make these pork sausages for him personally because I guess he believes women should be in the kitchen or whatever, even though she is quite literally the queen. While she is preparing one of these sausages, she is approached by a mouse. Bizarrely, a mouse with a little crown on her head. This is Madame Mouseking, the mother of the future Mouseking. She asks if she could borrow just a little bit of the pork sausage. After all, she is the queen of the mice, just as this woman is the queen of humans. They are equals in a way. The queen agrees. Madame Mouseking can have a little bit of pork fat for herself because she is a queen. Madame Mouseking immediately oversteps her bounds. A swarm of her filthy, plague-infested mouse children overwhelm the entire kitchen, eating everything they can get their grubby little hands on. In the Notes Alive VHS tape, every instance of mice despoiling food is marked with this little chant.
I want to bite a little bite.
The queen gave her some fat.
Surely you can spare much more. Give me the rest of that. Mice, mice everywhere. Skitter, scratch, and eat. Down on the floor, up on your plate. They feast on every treat.
Mice, mice everywhere. Skitter, scratch, and eat. Down on the floor, up on your plate, they feast on every treat. And in a moment, the fat was gone.
It is apparently the thing that everyone takes away from that video. Everyone says in YouTube comments and elsewhere, "Oh my god, I remember this chant. It's haunted my nightmares for years. I can't get it out of my head. It was so disturbing, it was so scary, and I guess I can count myself amongst that number." That chant helped me conceptualize for the first time as a child the sheer horror of your house and home overrun by vermin. You become keenly aware that no matter where you hail from on this human earth, millions of your ancestors suffered and died because mice and rats brought disease and death. I think this is an appropriate time to look into the nomenclature of Mouseking. The fact that the Nutcracker's Mouseking has 7 heads with 7 crowns evokes the Book of Revelation, right? The 7 heads of the beast. It also, very upsettingly, refers to a very real phenomenon of the Rat King. The rare instance of mice or rats being so densely packed together in their warrens and burrows or whatever that their tails get inextricably tied together. They are so bound by their knotted tails and encrusted filth that they are forced to act as one organism or die. You can find many pictures of pickled rat kings. Seemingly every single museum in Germany has one. I'm not going to show any here because, trust me, it's disturbing to look at. But the largest rat king on record was a tangle of 32 rodents. I'm not trying to freak you out too much because it really is an extraordinarily rare phenomenon, and I think human cleanliness has come forward enough that we don't just have nests of rats in every single wall. However, this is a fairy tale, and in fairy tales, rats remain a huge problem. So this fantasy kingdom is overrun by mice. What is the royal family ever going to do? Well, they turn to an inventor by the name of Drosselmeyer? This is where the story gets really weird. Up until now, this kingdom has been obviously fictional in a fairy tale sense. However, in this fairy tale that Drosselmeyer is sharing, the main character is someone who has the exact same name as his own. He doesn't outright say, "This is me." He just says, "Here is a story about a dude who just happens to have the exact same name that I do." This obviously ties into the ongoing concern of Hoffmann's Nutcracker. This fairy tale world is obviously fake, but characters we know seem to operate in that fairy tale space. So what level of reality is the tale of the hard nut operating at? Did these events really happen? Is this an allegory for real events? Or is this all just a story that Drosselmeyer is making up to appease a sick girl? The queen comes to Drosselmeyer wanting him to do something about the rat problem, and so he does. He supposedly invents the mousetrap. This leads to a wide extermination of mice throughout the entire kingdom, killing almost every mouse except, importantly, for Madame Mousekinck, who swears revenge, not on the king and queen, but on the baby princess Pirlipat. So Pirlipat's crib is protected at all times by a set of women with trained house cats. However, one day, their vigil fails. They all fall asleep. And that leads to the second upsetting thing about the tale of the hard nut. Madame Mousekinck slips into the crib and attacks Princess Pirlipat. I think if you're a parent, or really any person with a working sense of empathy, you'd understand that the thought of vermin savaging a defenseless infant in the crib is quite literally the most horrible thing you can think of. The thought of a blood feud escalating so quickly that it culminates in the endangerment of an innocent baby is so horrific that it kept me up at night, every single night, even as a 7-year-old. Fortunately, baby Pirlipat isn't harmed physically. However, she is cursed by the foul magics of Madame Mousekinck. Pirlipat deforms into a monster. A wide gaping jaw, huge eyes, a beard growing out of the tip of her chin. Her mother, the queen, looks upon the once beautiful baby and screams in horror. "My child is a monster. My child is a monster." The king and queen want to punish Drosselmeyer. They blame him for this. Madame Mousekinck wouldn't have attacked their child if his mousetraps hadn't been so effective. Drosselmeyer studies the now monstrous baby and realizes that she has a predilection for cracking nuts with her giant malformed teeth. After consulting the stars and some books of deep lore, he realizes that there is only one way to break the curse on Princess Pirlipat. That would be to go out into the world and find the greatest of all nuts, called Krakatok. The nut must be given to a man who has never shaved nor ever worn boots, which kind of indicates a young man, right? The young man must crack this nut between his teeth, offer the nut to Pirlipat, close his eyes, and take 7 steps backward. Only then will the curse be totally ameliorated. So Drosselmeyer goes out. He goes to every continent: South America, Asia, the other 5. 15 years pass. Obviously, during the telling of the story, narrative action lies with Drosselmeyer. What my mind keeps going to, has never stopped going to for 20 years, is what about Pirlipat? Pirlipat, who has this curse of monstrous ugliness. What is it like to be a child who everyone shudders as they look at you? Since most modern adaptations of the Nutcracker are obviously taking cues from the Tchaikovsky ballet, unless you go back to the 1816 Hoffmann tale or the 1845 Alexandre Dumas tale, you don't really have any way of finding out about Pirlipat and her story. The only mainstream adaptation that I know of which actually covered the tale of Pirlipat is the 1990 Canadian animated adaptation, The Nutcracker Prince. That movie isn't very good, but it is maybe one of the most accurate representations of the Hoffmann story. Although Nutcracker Prince does cover recover the tale of the hard nut, it does it in this sort of goofy UPA-influenced style throughout the whole flashback, which I appreciate aesthetically, but it really diminishes the absolute horror of what's going on there. After failing to find Krakatuk for 15 years, Drosselmeyer decides to return home. Once he arrives back in Nuremberg, he realizes that his brother, also named Drosselmeyer, happens to have Krakatuk, bought it from a Chinese merchant several years ago or something. He also realizes that his nephew, a young man who has never worn boots nor shaved and is adept at cracking nuts, is the perfect candidate to break the curse. So they find the king and queen in Pirlipat. Many young men from around the kingdom have lined up because they all want to take turns trying to crack Krakatuk. For you see, the king and queen have promised Pirlipat's hand to whoever could make her pretty again. They all fail. They have weak teeth. No one had fluoride back then. God damn it. Finally, it's the turn for the young nephew. He takes a bite out of Krakatuk. With his mighty jaws, he is, in fact, able to split the Lord of Nuts open. He takes the nut within and gives it to Pirlipat. She swallows it whole. She is immediately cured, turning into a beautiful maiden. But the ritual isn't done. So the nephew closes his eyes and walks backward. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. On the 7th step, he trips on Madame Mousering's, cracking her neck, killing her. Because he didn't take the 7 steps uninterrupted, everything goes wrong. Pirlipat's curse bounces onto the young nephew. He assumes all of her ugliness. A wide mouth, horrible gnashing teeth, huge eyes, and an incessant urge to swallow nuts. He became a human Nutcracker. With her dying gasps, Madame Mouserings declares that the young man will always remain a Nutcracker until he can defeat her own progeny, the 7-headed Mouseking. The young man, now trapped in monstrous form, runs to Pirlipat. Even though he is cursed, at least she is now there for him, because her hand is promised to his. He was able to break the curse after all. The first thing Pirlipat does is spurn the Nutcracker. She turns her nose up at him. Drosselmeyer and his cursed nephew are banished from the land. And so, supposedly, that very same Nutcracker that Marie loved and cared for, who she protected with her slipper in the battle with the Mouseking, is the very same young nephew who broke the curse with Krakatuk, but was therefore condemned to be a Nutcracker himself. After 3 days of storytelling, Drosselmeyer concludes once and for all the tale of the hard nut. Although Marie still has a long way to go in terms of recovering from her injury, Drosselmeyer has a gift for her, a fully restored Nutcracker. Marie is proud that her Nutcracker has become a noble prince due to his actions, even if he didn't get to marry Pirlipat after all. Drosselmeyer leaves her with some words of somewhat foreboding encouragement. "Ah, my dear little Marie, you're luckier than I or anyone else. You're a born princess like Pirlipat, for you rule over a fresh and beautiful country. But you will have much to suffer if you mean to befriend a poor misshapen Nutcracker, for the king of the mice will beset him wherever he goes. But there's nothing I can do. You alone can save him. So be steadfast and loyal." This brings us into the 3rd section of the Nutcracker, a moral test for young Marie while she is stuck in bed. Late at night, while Marie is stuck convalescing, the Mouseking returns to her. He is no longer satisfied with mere revenge, he wants to torment her. So every night he offers her a choice. "I am going to kill your beloved Nutcracker once and for all, unless you give up your precious Christmas gifts to me, whether that be her candy, or her dolls made of candy." Although it breaks her heart to do so, Marie will always give up her material possessions if it means saving the Nutcracker's life one more day. You see, even though the Nutcracker has been repaired for Drosselmeyer, he still hasn't woken up. He hasn't come back to life. One night when Marie is at the end of her rope, the Nutcracker finally does awaken. He thanks Marie for making such sacrifices for him. A single sword is all he he needs to defeat the Mouseking once and for all. Marie is able to ask Fritz, and he's like, one of my toy soldiers has retired, so yeah, I guess I can get you a sword. Once Marie has provided the resurrected Nutcracker with a sword, he leaves her company to confront the Mouseking. After the sound of a scuffle, the Nutcracker returns, covered in blood. He has slain the Mouseking once and for all. You alone, dear lady, gave me the courage and strength to fight the insolent varlet who dared to defy you. The treacherous king of the mice has been vanquished and lies writhing in his blood. Deign, dear lady, to accept these tokens of victory from the hand of one who will be your true and faithful knight until death. With that, Nutcracker adroitly stripped off the Mouse-King's 7 golden crowns, which he had been wearing on his left arm, and handed them to Marie, who accepted them with delight. The Nutcracker rose to his feet and continued, "Oh, Mistress Stahlbaum, what splendid things I can show you in this hour of victory over my enemy. If you will be kind enough to follow me a little way, come with me. I beg you, dear mistress." The Nutcracker brings Marie up into her family's attic, which turns out to be a secret entranceway to the Nutcracker's own realm, the land of the dolls. This is a land constructed of various forms of candy and sweets, inhabited by every ethnicity of doll that you can imagine. When you look at the types of dolls that children had in the 18th and 19th centuries, it's fascinating to see how truly diverse they were. Back when children didn't have that high a chance to see anyone outside of their own ethnicity during their lifetimes, a lot of their knowledge of other people groups came from their dolls. Anytime you look at a Victorian doll collection, you have the standard European porcelain dolls, but then you'd be like, oh, okay, there's the Turkish doll, and there is the Japanese doll, and there is the African doll. Oh no, that's really racist. The diversity of dolls as presented in this last portion of the book translated easily to the second act of the Tchaikovsky ballet, right? It allowed them to demonstrate a diversity of musical and dance styles, even if the actual plot had to be put on hold. After the Nutcracker and Maurice sailed to the land of the dolls, they passed through a wide variety of candy-themed geographical sites, the Lemonade River and Gingerbread City, all in purpose of getting to the capital city where Marie will be crowned the queen of the dolls. This should give you pause, or at least it gave me pause. What's with all of this lore of Nutcracker being the king of the dolls? Doesn't that directly contradict the story that Drosselmeyer just provided Marie about being a young cursed nephew who was meant to be engaged to Princess Pirlipat? Marie herself brings this up a couple of times, and the Nutcracker always tells her to drop it. Marie paid no attention to them, for she was looking into the fragrant, rosy waves, from each of which a charming little girl's face smiled at her. "Oh," she cried, clapping her little hands. "Look, Mr. Drosselmeyer, Princess Pirlipat is down there. She's smiling at me as sweetly as can be. Oh, dear Mr. Drosselmeyer, do look and see." But Nutcracker sighed almost sorrowfully and said, "Dear Mistress Stahlbaum, that's not Princess Pirlipat. That's you, your own self. It's your own sweet face smiling at you out of the waves." Is this candy world meant to be a paradise? I'm frankly not sure. Nutcracker will point at denizens of this kingdom and say, look at them, their teeth are rotting out from all the sugar that they're eating. There's mention of a giant who comes by who devours the marzipan castles that these dolls live in, who can only be bought off by appeasement. These dolls get into conflict with each other often and can only settle themselves by calling upon their god, the confectioner, who doesn't really seem to be real, but seems to be a social construction to remind the dolls of their mortality and fallibility. Finally, they make it to the capital, and Marie gets to meet the Nutcracker's whole family, all of his doll sisters, who praise Marie for her nobility and good character, telling her that she is a better person than Princess Pirlipat could ever be. Once again, the Nutcracker having an entire family in fiefdom out in the kingdom of dolls seems to contradict contradict everything that we know about him. Here I am just thinking of Marie, this girl who is being forced through this hallucinogenic land, being bestowed with a royal title that she never really asked for. It reminds me of that Disney movie. You know, the one about a girl who is the princess of a candy world, but she feels insecure about her position in her relation to other people. She has developed such a sense of self-loathing that she even calls herself something like a glitch in the system. I'm sure you all know the movie I'm talking about. That's right, the Cookie Carnival from 1935. You're telling me you don't remember the Cookie Carnival? Disney's greatest movie of all time? A gingerbread man comes to town on the day of the Great Cookie Parade and he comes across a crying cookie girl and she's like, I want to be part of the parade, but I haven't any pretty clothes to wear. And he's like, wipe your tears away. You're gonna be the cookie queen. And then he pulls out a lot of frosting and then he yassifies her into being the cookie queen. And then when all the other cookies see her, they are immediately so horned up that they're like, oh, hail the cookie queen. But then she has to choose a cookie king. And at the end of the short, she ends up choosing the original gingerbread man who yassified her in the first place. It's the ultimate romance. Are you really telling me you don't remember the Cookie Carnival? But seriously, I genuinely think the Nutcracker and the Mouseking is the first time I've seen a land of candy or a land of sweets represented in fiction. I guess it makes sense. Most modern forms of candy don't get invented until like 1847 or so. However, at the critical moment, Marie too is seized out of this fantasy. She feels the experience of falling away from the Nutcracker, away from the kingdom of dolls. And then she wakes up the next morning. Once again, the Nutcracker is nothing but a wooden toy. She tries to tell her family about everything that happened, about the defeat of the Mouseking in her trip to the kingdom of dolls, but they all scoff at her. Her parents think that she is silly and foolish. Even her brother Fritz joins in. And even Godfather Drosselmeyer scoffs at her. Her father forbids her from mentioning any of this ever again. He says that if Marie were to ever mention the Nutcracker's curse or the Mouseking ever again, that he would toss the Nutcracker and all of her other dolls out the window. So Marie resigns herself to silence. But in her heart of hearts, she still believes in the Nutcracker. Then one day, there is a knock at the door. It is none other than Drosselmeyer's young nephew, and he looks exactly how he was described in The Tale of the Hard Nut. He's even good at cracking nuts! Thus we get to the end of the story. Marie turned as red as a beet when she saw the young man, and she turned even redder after dinner when young Drosselmeyer asked her to go with him to the glass cabinet in the parlor. Go and play, children, said the judge. Now that my clocks are telling the right time, I have no objection. No sooner was young Drosselmeyer alone with Marie when he went down on one knee and said, Oh, my precious Mistress Stahlbaum, you see at your feet the happiest of men, whose life you saved on this very spot. You are kind enough to say that you would not scorn me as that nasty Princess Pirlipat did for becoming ugly on your account. In that instant, I ceased to be a lowly Nutcracker and regained my former, not unpleasant aspect. O precious Mistress Stahlbaum, favor me with your hand, share my crown and kingdom with me, reign with me over Marzipan Castle, for I am king there now. Marie raised the young man to his feet and said softly, Dear Mr. Drosselmeyer, you are a good, kind gentleman, and since, in addition, you rule over a charming country full of pretty and amusing people, I accept you as my betrothed. So then Marie was engaged to Drosselmeyer. In a year and a day he called for her in a golden carriage drawn by silver horses. At the wedding, 22,000 of the most brilliant figures adorned with pearls and diamonds danced, and Marie is believed to still be queen of a country where sparkling Christmas woods, transparent marzipan castles, in short, the most wonderful of things, can be seen if you have the right sort of eyes for it. And that's the story of Nutcracker and the King of the Mice. This is the happy fairy tale ending, is it not? It turns out that the Nutcracker was a real boy after all. However, this ending never sat right with me. It's just too clean. I think the easiest way to summarize my issue, the Nutcracker as Marie's doll, the Nutcracker as Drosselmeyer's nephew, and the Nutcracker as the king of the dolls are three very separate conceptions of the same character, and they do not gel together easily. So I poured through the text again and again, trying to reconcile the inconsistencies. And here's the thing, it's okay for a fairy tale to have inconsistencies. That's part of the magic of a fairy tale. If anything, I think a lot of modern fantasy suffers from the urge to litigate the magic and mystery out of stories like this. ETA Hoffmann's Nutcracker does not need a fan theory wiki. I've seen some people say that the Nutcracker is a giant metaphor for death, that this strange epilogue at the end about Marie and Nutcracker leaving for the kingdom of dolls for good 1 year after they meet is an indication that in actuality Marie never did recover from her injury, that it became reinfected and she died. I entertained this read for a bit, especially considering the fact that ETA Hoffmann had lost his own young daughter, but ultimately I didn't find it a satisfying answer either. It was only when I read some scholarship from acclaimed folklorist Jack Zipes that I finally landed on my answer. I am not saying that this is the definitive way to interpret the text. I think the reason why this is a good story is because you can interpret it in a wide variety of ways. But this is what made most sense to me. E.T.A. Hoffmann wrote this story for a friend of his who had 2 young children named Marie and Fritz. To these children, he was their Drosselmeyer, the strange magician and storyteller. The Nutcracker is a story about make-believe. Marie is a child whose creativity is in danger of being snuffed out by her stuffy, upper-middle-class, no-nonsense parents. When the Nutcracker comes to life and they fight the Mouseking, it really was just an extended play session that led to her injury with the cabinet. When Godfather Drosselmeyer shares the tale of the hard nut, that really is just a story that he's making up on the spot. He is offering a potential backstory to the Nutcracker to give form to her creative imaginings about the Nutcracker while she is stuck in bed. Once the Mouseking is defeated for good and they travel to the land of the dolls, this is where Marie's creativity takes over. This is her imagination about the Nutcracker and his world at its fullest potential. This last quarter of the book is written so radically differently from everything that came before. It is so whimsical and descriptive about these worlds of candy and about these bizarre doll societies. In her own way, Marie is becoming a writer of her very own. She is world building. And that finally solves, for me, why there is such a contrast between the Nutcracker as presented in the Tale of the Hard Nut, Drosselmeyer's fantasy, versus the Kingdom of Dolls, which is Marie's fantasy. The Tale of the Hard Nut is an ironic and cruel satire of the old world order that Napoleon had just crushed in the previous decades, provided by a cynical and jaded old man. This is why at the end of the day, Princess Pirlipat, despite all of her tragedy, is so underdeveloped. To Drosselmeyer, she is literally just a plot device. Meanwhile, when we look at the Kingdom of Dolls, it is a world built exclusively out of Marie's concerns. Sugar, toys, nice clothes. Every aspect of this kingdom can be traced back to things that Marie wanted for Christmas. I'm sure you're asking yourself, if this read is cogent, then how come the literal nephew shows up at the end and claims to be the Nutcracker? Well, everything he says to Marie at the end is stuff that Marie had previously mentioned to Drosselmeyer and her parents. I choose to believe that Drosselmeyer coached his young nephew and said, "Hey, if you say this girl is really going to like you." So at the end of the story, when Marie chooses to live in the land of dolls forever, that's not a sign of death. That means she became a writer herself. She grew up into a young woman with a rich interior life, who never forgot the wonders of imagination and play. She transcended her stuffy upbringing and became a richer person for it. The magic of the Nutcracker is that it is a story about how we use stories to learn about ourselves and grow. In telling stories to to Marie, Drosselmeyer teaches her how to tell her own story. And so, in a roundabout way, ETA Hoffmann was responsible for my inner life as a child as well. My childhood trauma, which is to say, hyperfixation on the many tragedies and traumas that Princess Pirlipat went through, perhaps taught me empathy, a deep desire to want the best for everyone and anyone. Princess Pirlipat isn't real, and she probably wasn't even real within the story of the Nutcracker. Nevertheless, I hope she found her happy ending. Now that I have digested the Nutcracker again and again, I don't have to be scared of it anymore. Now it can be just another cherished childhood memory. Maybe this is me finding my own kingdom of dolls, my own realm of internal peace. Perhaps this will inspire you to, in turn, look back on the stories that scared you during your childhood. Try to grapple with them and try to understand why they scared you and how it turned you into the person that you are today. Using narrative to examine ourselves and discover who we truly are is what story is all about. Thank you for joining me this evening. I wish you Merry Christmas. And so does Annette Funicello. Anyway, happy holidays. I love you.